Welcome to Bleach Revisited. I am Carker Gold, host of this series, and this is a very special episode in which we'll be discussing something kind of unique. This won't be a chapter reading, this will be a part of a separate series of videos that I'm going to be doing, focusing on just extra things that aren't a part of the chapter readings. So there are things that I will want to discuss that are relevant to the chapter readings, but not something that I could do during those readings in particular, and I think that need to have a dedicated video for them. There's also a lot of things that I've never really seen other Bleach YouTubers talk about, and I think is pretty pertinent. It's things that don't come up very often, and I really just want to have a space to talk about those things. And so this is the space to talk about this. So what are we looking at today? You might notice this is the cut of Ichigo from the first volume chapter poem from Death in the Strawberry, but you'll see here that the poem is not in English. This is, of course, the Japanese version of the first volume of Bleach. And I did manage to get the black and white scans for the entirety of the Tankobon Japanese collected volumes for Bleach. So I will have those to refer to, and I will be actually pulling pages from those to refer to throughout the future of this channel. But one of the things that I want to do is, of course, highlight some of the kind of things that would have been unique to the Japanese reading experience that we don't get in English. Notably, these character poems in English are just read left to right, but in the Japanese it is up and down, and it gives a different kind of feel for these pieces in the page. Instead of everything kind of reading left to right, we get this more up-down experience. It does make this isolation of the character read more vertically than it reads horizontally, if that makes sense. And so it also makes the poems, I feel, stand out a little bit more. Whenever it's the English text and the full scroll of left to right, it feels less significant than the top to bottom Japanese. Of course, the titles for a lot of these chapters are both in English as well as the Romanji, the katakana for them. So, Death and the Strawberry, Sturaru Berry. I don't know, but I don't read Japanese. But it's that way. Of course, we do get that all of this, and I just kind of want to go through a little bit of the first volume. The cool thing about these scans is that this person, even though they're not in perfect quality, the person that I did get to get all these scans, we do have the full actual spreads here, rather than seeing them separated. So here's what the full Japanese spread for Death and Strawberry would have looked like chapter 1 of Bleach, which is kind of cool. I do like that I have those in a singular image instead of split between the two pages. I really wish the Viz scans were that way, but unfortunately they are not. Now, one thing that I did want to talk about, and the reason why I'm making this video, is not just the way that the text is laid out, which obviously is kind of important, but I really wanted to talk about the sound effects in Bleach. And sound effects are typically something that my mind just glazes over in a series. I tend to kind of ignore them whatsoever, like entirely. But they do have a very distinctive visual look to them. And I think one of the big things that feels lost in the localization for Bleach is that Viz's localization, they decided to translate the onomatopoeic sounds, and I don't feel like they did an amazing job for keeping the actual drawings. So here's the thing. I assume, because this has to make sense, is that essentially they have a version of the manga that doesn't have the text bubbles. They have a version of these pages that is just the art, that is without any effects, without any of that stuff, right? Because that gets done in different processes. I don't know how much of that's digital nowadays. Maybe it's all just digital. You can just have layers on essentially a Photoshop document, and you can just hit between the layers. But clearly they can just kind of disable whatever the art, either that or they could actually go in and photo manipulate all of these, which it seems like a huge pain for localization. But perhaps back in Bleach's day they were still doing that. But even in 2004, we had those tools available to us. Nevertheless, speculation aside, the thing that bothers me is that, one, the text, as you can see, reads top to bottom in a lot of these panels, which allows them to kind of keep this top to bottom legibility, which is really nice. So it changes the way that your eyes are scanning the page. But the other thing is that with these larger sound effects that are meant to kind of take you through the page, the way in which they are drawn, the actual form that they have, serves a function. And you lose that function whenever you have to change the form to English characters. And so I wanted to go to some of the kind of like just the way that this kick is split up and like these very sharp kind of like bits for it. Um, the way that like these characters are arranged adds a lot to this panel that I don't really feel is there in the actual first volume. I should say, notably, that this video will only contain spoilers for the very first chapter and first volume of Bleach. I won't be talking about things outside of that, but yeah, don't worry about anything getting really massively spoiled. So long as you've read the first chapter of Bleach, you're fine. But I mostly just wanted to articulate a little bit of why this is something significant and why, if you can, read it in Japanese, because I think the intent of the author is significant. I think it matters, and I think a lot of these drawings were made with, not having the English sound effects in mind, having instead these Japanese sound effects. And so the way that they frame these different things, the way that they are presented, is significant. We also get like the different kind of formatting for text here and there. Same thing with Ishin's kick here. Just like the way that this reads and the way that it changes the way that you read the kick. Lots and lots of dialogue in this first bit. But we will see some moments that are especially poignant. I love this. I think, the way in which this is just like, maybe again because I'm not native Japanese, as far as like reading and everything goes, I'm not going to immediately see these characters and read it as a character. I'm instead just going to see it as these sort of symbols. But this panel is stronger for having these almost like it's almost like a tally mark, across the page, but it builds that sort of like like that rhythm. I don't know how this was translated. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it adds to the page, and the onomatopoeia can be used visually in a lot of ways. I'll always reference Fukumoto's manga like Akagi or Kaiji using Zawa, which was an onomatopoeia that he developed himself to provide tension to a lot of the scenes, and he would flood the page with them sometimes. And you really get like that was something that was significant, and not just the way that it was shaped, but also the specific sound that it had. Also, like it's not something that you could really quite do the same with in English, just as far as the visual aspect of it goes, right? Now here I think they acknowledge this, which was like a dash or a tilde anyway. But the comical kind of way this is drawn, there's a lot of stuff like that. I think especially there's so much here that like it's sound effect wise, the way that this is drawn works in a way that I feel like maybe the English sound effects don't, and I've drawn more into the actual art and image for being done that way. But I'll get to the ones that I feel are pretty significant whenever we get to this battle with Fishbone D. Like for instance, this one, I love the way that this is drawn, the way that this arcs over her head, like just that kind of crash of the Hollow's yell, right? The significant like the way that this is done is way more striking than the way that the English was done, and it has a visual style to it that makes it like you couldn't emulate 100% in the English. Yeah. Same thing here. Get a little bit more, especially. I mean, this is that yell from Ichigo as he breaks, shatters free. Yeah, it's just because so much of the Japanese onomatopoeics are so jagged like this and so fractured. It creates a different visual sort of language that you can play with that isn't isn't at all like the same for the English. There's a different sort of framing and a different way that you can draw the eye through the images that you just can't with a literal English translation, which is, it's unfortunate, but it's just how it is. I think this is one of the ones that really struck me is, we get the bit where Ruki has been slapped and she's like moving through like this big kind of bracket that almost encloses her. That's a part of this sound effect that is breaking the panel space. And it's like, if you're reading this on page, like you're going to notice that definitely, but also the characters being framed within it and the way that they are is significant and unique. Yeah, same thing here. These downstrokes again, kind of mirroring the way that she is being thrust down, that she's falling. That's something that's also lost. Trying to get like a definitive one of those dooms, that we always get the doom in the English Bleach. I believe that we get the kind of equivalent here at some point. But again, just like things like this, like the repetitious nature of how being able to cram as many of these in here and them being more symbol like focused, I guess. I say symbol focused. I mean, that's all language is symbols, but there's more of a runic quality almost to the characters that I think works and lends itself really well here. But yeah, there's essentially the equivalent of Doom, but instead of DOOM like we get, it's this shot. Yeah, and like the slash being also punctuated with this big cross that follows down the page. That was something that was also lost in the English translation. And yeah, ultimately, there's just a lot of things like that. Uh, it is unfortunate, but it is what it is. I just wanted to draw a little bit of attention to the way that the characters, the actual like written language of Japanese, is as much a part of Bleach's identity as some of the other visuals are, and kind of get you to recognize a little bit of that, like a little bit of how like this grip, this clenching sound, done onomatopoeically, but is drawn in a specific way that you kind of can't do quite with the English characters without losing some sense of that. That it has an action of its own, that it has a certain quality about it. Yeah, it's significant stuff. I think it's an important kind of aspect, and I'll leave here on the Doom page because I do think that this is a little bit cooler in the Japanese, and maybe that's just the weeb in me coming out. Who knows? But have you thought about this before? Have you considered this aspect of the manga? Like the way that the sound effects and the way that the language just kind of reads you through the page differently? If you haven't, I encourage you to try to find Japanese scans of some of your favorite manga and just see how the reading experience is like different and how it differs. And which one you like more, Sound effects aren't always my favorite thing in manga. Like I said, my eyes kind of glaze over them and I sort of tune them out. I don't really read them. I don't read them aloud, nor do I really pay a lot of visual attention to them. They quickly fall into the background. But I'm finding with the Japanese, maybe because because they're not a symbol that I recognize, because I'm not reading it naturally, I have to think like, okay, what does that symbol represent? Uh, then it takes on more of a stylistic depiction for me, and I like the way that it's stylistically depicted. I also, I'm a huge nerd for the original intent of the artist and the way that the artist wanted to depict these scenes. And so, of course, I'm going to always want to kind of defer to that, even though the version that I have of the manga is not that, right? By the constraints of translation. Nevertheless, I do encourage you to read Bleach in Japanese if you can. If you can't, shonen manga is always a good place to start because it's not going to be incredibly difficult like reading material. Typically, series that are intended for younger audiences, children's shows, that sort of thing. Think about like if I was learning this language naturally, what sort of material would I be picking up and looking at? What would I be reading? What would I be immersing myself in? And so, even if you're a beginner Japanese student, I think it can really behoove you to do something like pick up your favorite manga and try to start getting into it, start trying to read it. And I think it'll give you a reading experience that is, you will find, unlike the reading experience that you have of reading the English translated version. So, I do appreciate the time that you've taken to watch this. I hope that I've maybe changed a little bit of your perspective on things, maybe think a little bit more about the way that you consume any manga, but especially Bleach, right? Bleach is such a visually focused series. All manga are visual, of course, or at least most are. But Bleach definitely is one that has these big spreads, these big expressive panels, and part of it that's, like I've admitted is a little bit easy to overlook is the way that the sound effects are depicted on page. And it's something that, the English translation fails to do in a way that is 100% representative of the original product, and something that I wanted to call some attention to. So as always, this has been Karakura Gold, reminding you, spirits are forever with you. Stay gold.